Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 5th of November. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. And as the weather starts to pick up across west and northwestern Alaska, you can always give us a call at 1-800-472-0391 for the Alaska Weather Information Line. Of course, the website's always online for you as well, weather.gov/Alaska. And on your mobile device, mobile, M-O-B-I-L-E, .weather.gov. Type in your location, save that to your home screen. It acts just like an app from your trusted weather source here at the National Weather Service. If you can't find what you're looking for, make sure you send me an email, david.snider@noaa.gov. I'll know it's important because only my mom called me David, so I'll sit up and listen a little bit better. But let me know what's going on, and any way that I can help you with anything that we do here at the National Weather Service, I am happy to get you started in the right direction and hopefully answer your question right away. Let's take a look at what's going on across northwestern Alaska tonight. For all the areas shaded in red, we are under a winter storm warning. It means you're going to see some snow and in some cases a little more wind. For the interior of the Seward Peninsula, we're expecting about 2 to 4 inches of snow. There could be some isolated areas that see as much as 1 foot though, 12 inches of new snow. Not a whole lot of wind is expected across the interior of the Seward Peninsula. It may be breezy, but the strongest wind will be located a little bit further to the north and west. For the Kobuk Valley, for the Chukchi Coast, and all the way up toward about Ambler, we do expect some gusts anywhere from 35 to about 45 miles per hour. And with snow flying, you know that is going to reduce visibility, make it harder to fly, and just generally move around. So be careful and make sure you don't lose your way. That winter storm warning is starting tonight and is expected to go through at least about 9 o'clock tomorrow night. For most of that northwestern coastline all the way back to Ambler there, where it will continue to snow. In this region again, you might see as much as 12 to 14 inches of snow. That's on the high side, but in general about 2 to 4, maybe 5 inches for most of the region. Now as you head down the coast, you see some different colors here. For the Yukon Delta, let's start there. That orange color is a coastal flood watch. And that means we could see a push of water moving our way as we get into Tuesday night and Wednesday. That could be 4 feet above the normal highest tide for the area. 4 feet above the normal highest tide. This will be from Tuesday night into Wednesday night. And when we get to the marine forecast in just a little bit, you'll see why that's going to happen a little bit later than what we're seeing up here with the snow. For the inland areas, or the coastal areas I should say, of the Norton Sound region and the southern Seward Peninsula coastline, a high surf advisory is posted. That's not coastal flooding. That means really rough surf. That could bring some coastal erosion to your area. And that period, again, is going to last from about noon tomorrow on Tuesday through about noon on Wednesday for the roughest conditions in the region. So once again, we have a winter storm warning for the areas shaded in red. That starts tonight and goes all the way through a good chunk of early Wednesday in some cases. We have coastal or high surf advisories here for the areas shaded in yellow for rough surf conditions and possibly some coastal erosion. And we're watching out for high tide. Again, coastal flooding potential there that could come above 4 feet above the normal highest tide for the Yukon Delta region, especially for the coastal villages along the river there and right along the coast. Make sure you're paying attention to the weather. You can listen to Marine Band Radio for the latest updates there. Go online to weather.gov/Fairbanks and watch the social media account, facebook.com/NWS Alaska, or just search that in the search bar, or watch the Twitter feed, twitter.com/NWS Fairbanks. Here's a look at the latest satellite picture now. As you can see, we've got a very healthy storm system out across the western Bering. That is a storm force low. The storm force winds, though, are not really expected to make it into the western coast. That's the good news, but the power of the system is dragging in an awful lot of southerly wind, and with that comes warmth and moisture and snow when that runs into a high rock wall here that we call the Brooks Range. In this region, we expect to see the most snow production, and in some cases, like I said, that could reach upwards of a foot. Most places aren't going to see that, but we do expect to see that healthy push of wind follow this. And as that front comes through, we expect to see a little bit more of a westerly surge work its way into Norton Sound and around the Yukon Delta. So once again, we're asking our coastal villages to pay special attention to that. The time to prepare would be now. Tomorrow, again, conditions will be changing very quickly. Now, as we look out across the Gulf of Alaska, things are pretty high and dry. High pressure sitting across the western Yukon right now. You can see across the northern Gulf that conditions are fairly dry there. But it looks like we're going to see the changing conditions there moving in from the central and southern parts of the Gulf. As that starts to creep its way to the north and east, you'll start to see wind coming up fairly quickly across parts of coastal sections of southeast. But at least for a little while, we're going to have some drier weather, at least through tonight and Tuesday. By early morning Wednesday, you should start to see some changes working your way there for southeast. For south central, low pressure is also going to move its way into the northern and western Gulf. As a result of that, we'll start to see some changes, perhaps as early as Wednesday, for snow around the Seward Peninsula, across the Kenai Peninsula in the Seward area. Some places there might pick up a couple inches of snow in the Kenai as well. For most of the central and eastern interior, things look pretty nice. Things look to be fairly dry. Of course, that is still prolonging some air quality issues there around North Pole and perhaps parts of Fairbanks. Here's the weather map now. High pressure sitting across the Yukon, 1,036 millibars in southeast. Low pressure has a trough sitting across the northern Gulf. Really not a whole lot to write home about right here. Winds are a little breezy there across the northern parts of the Lynn Canal, but as you move southward, those winds really fall off fairly quickly. So the big story is what we see out across the west. A deep southerly flow moving over the YK Delta, Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula, Kotzebue Sound, and the northwestern coast. There's not a lot of sea ice right here, if any at all, although it has been filling in across the Beaufort Sea, and that's allowing winds to move in fairly easily from the east and southeast. With low pressure down to 974 millibars, we're going to get a little bit of a breeze working across the Aleutians, and the seas are coming up there. You'll see that in the marine forecast in just a bit. Watch for areas of fog in the morning across southwestern Alaska, showers for the Alaska Peninsula, and rain developing the further north you go. We've seen a few lightning strikes across the northern Bering Sea. Don't expect a whole lot to form, but if you see or hear thunder and lightning again tomorrow, especially around Savunga and St. Lawrence Island, that's pretty much what we're looking at there. Low pressure has a lot of instability out ahead of it, and this is a strong weather system. The low pressure will be working inland, and as that colder air still sits across the interior of the Seward Peninsula, the interior of the Yukon Delta, the Selawik Peninsula, all the way up through Kotzebue Sound and the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, you're going to see some snow, as much as 12 to 14 inches in some cases. Like I said, most areas are not going to see that much. For the Kuskokwim, for the Kotzebue Sound region, we're looking at about 4 to 7 inches of snow at most. As you move a little bit further southward, those numbers should fall off fairly quickly, but we're also dealing with wind anywhere from 35 to 45 mile-an-hour gusts, which will reduce that visibility. As we get into Tuesday, you'll notice many more areas along the coast are kind of colored in this pink color. That means we expect a rain and snow mix, or at least the potential of some of that mixing there. As you look down to the south, a 996 millibar low there will be dragging in some of that warmer, wetter air into the Bristol Bay region. Low pressure across the western Gulf at 1,000 millibars is going to keep that south and easterly flow working its way toward Kodiak Island and parts of the Bristol Bay region. Kodiak Island, Chillicothe Strait, and the northern western parts of the Gulf are going to see the greatest amount of wind, but still absent is any major effect there around southeast. Tuesday looks pretty nice in southeast, with a few areas seeing some occasional gusts. Watch for some morning fog across the northern coast, and as this low pressure system continues to track northward, we'll see a little more snow for the Chukchi Coast on Wednesday. Most of the warnings will have expired by this point, but we're still looking at that westerly push coming into Norton Sound and the Yukon Delta as we go from Tuesday and into Wednesday. There's another storm behind that. This will be something that we watch for later in the week for the western coast, but you can see in the meantime, winds are coming up for the central and western chain, showers there followed by snow and some stronger wind from the north and west. In the meantime, when we look at Wednesday, you can see that low pressure here across the north and western Gulf at 1,001 millibars is pushing a front closer to Kodiak Island, the northern Gulf, and southeastern Alaska. This will strengthen that wind moving through southeast. With that, we expect to see some gales at least across the outer coast, maybe something stronger as we get into Wednesday and Thursday. High pressure doesn't budge much, and because of that, we get that squeezing effect that starts to drive a little more wind your way. But right now, it looks like mostly rain, mostly wind for parts of southeast as we get into Wednesday and Thursday. We'll keep an eye on that. Around the Seward area in the Kenai Peninsula and in the Chugach, we expect to see snow. A lot of that does not seem to make its way into Anchorage just yet, but on the other side, probably west of the Parks Highway, we'll start to see snow forming there, especially along the higher terrain. That's a quick blast of weather and a lot to take in there. You can always check out these images anytime at weather.gov/Anchorage/TV if you want to check them out yourself. Here's a look at the forecast for tomorrow morning. Temps will be in the 30s for most parts of southeast. A few areas around Haines and Skagway might be a little bit cooler in the teens and 20s. Prince William Sound and westward into Cook Inlet, single digits and teens. 24 in Homer, 23 below in Fort Yukon, single digits for the Beaufort Seacoast, teens for the Chukchi Coast, 36 in Nome, lower 30s for Bristol Bay down toward the southwest coast, and 37 in St. Paul. High temperatures on Tuesday, warming up around Fort Yukon, 2 below there. 40s for most of southeast, a nice day, not a lot of wind. 30s around Prince William Sound, 20s and 30s for the Cook Inlet region. For southwest, look for temps in the upper 30s and lower 40s, warming up thanks to that southwest flow. Look at Nome, back to 39. The Chukchi Coast back in the mid to upper 30s, above freezing there. You start to get into some cooler weather there as you move up toward Utqiagvik and Wainwright. Overnight lows on Wednesday morning, still high and dry across the eastern interior. The northern coast, teens and 20s, southwest 20s and 30s. The Alaska Peninsula holding in the 40s with southeast in the 20s and 30s. And high temperatures on Wednesday, warming up in the interior, 30s for south central, southwest still holding above freezing.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to aviation weather now, a broad area of low pressure, fairly strong out in the Bering Sea, of course, will be sending us that strong southerly flow right up the west coast, and that will encourage areas of IFR from the Chukchi Coast all the way through the western half of the Seward Peninsula and the Bering Strait into the northern Yukon Delta and across Bristol Bay into Kodiak Island and points across the Pacific coastline of the Alaska Peninsula. On the other side of the story is southeast, that is going to enjoy high pressure, sitting pretty much in the clear, VFR conditions all the way through the Panhandle into south central, the interior, and points northward as we go. As we get into the afternoon tomorrow, watch for the main area of lift around low pressure to be centered up very close to St. Lawrence Island. We've already had thunderstorm activity today across the Bering Sea. Just a couple strikes out there, but a sign of some pretty strong weather moving through the Bering Strait, so consider that in your plans. IFR expected across the Bering Strait into Norton Sound and the northern Yukon Delta, as well as the Chukchi Coast, the eastern half of the interior, the Beaufort Seacoast, most of south central with the exception of the southern half of the Kenai Pen, will all be in VFR. Same goes for southeast again all the way through Tuesday afternoon. Considerable MVFR, of course, across the southwest coast and most of the Aleutian chain with a few holes hit and miss. For Wednesday morning, IFR is expected to continue across the Chukchi Coast, most of Kotzebue Sound into the lower Kobuk and Noatak valleys, as well as southwestern Alaska, and moving back into the Gulf here as a new wave of low pressure starts to strengthen and move closer to the Gulf Coast. Most of south central and southeast and the eastern interior will be generally VFR again, and for Wednesday afternoon, you can see the band of moisture spreading north and east, as we just saw with the front on the surface charts. As that is expanding north and east, the winds are coming up along this boundary as well, so plan on turbulence across the eastern and northern Gulf Coast and wrapping around into Kodiak Island as we go through Wednesday afternoon. Low pressure is also going to create considerable areas of poor visibility around the northern Arctic coast, but a lot of improvements across the west, but we're going to watch for turbulence and icing potential to continue across the western interior as we go, and another band of IFR expected across the central chain for your Wednesday afternoon. Here's your pass conditions for tomorrow for Anaktuvik and Atigun Pass. We expect to see VFR, but MVFR will be encroaching quickly from the west by Tuesday evening. So most of the day should be okay, but you'll see a quick change by Tuesday night. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will start to see that change developing as early as the afternoon. So MVFR there by late in the day. Rainy Pass, so far so good, but expect changes for your Wednesday. Windy Pass also looking to be VFR. Same goes for Isabel Pass and Mentasta Pass. Expect changes west of Mentasta Pass for your Wednesday. Tenita Pass, we expect to see some changes for midweek. VFR tomorrow, though. Portage Pass expected to be VFR for most of your Tuesday. And Chilkoot and White Pass look pretty good. Again, high pressure sitting right on top of the region. Freezing levels indicate that there's some warm air sitting across the Gulf, the surface freezing line just north of Sitka to the northern Gulf, and then taking a hard jog north after you get out of Unalakleet and north of Shishmaref and Nome. So that's pushing through the Bering Strait thanks to that very broad area of low pressure here across the western Bering Sea. Levels along the southwest coast as high as 2,000 feet, though, as you get into the Bristol Bay region and parts of the central chain. Icing potential is going up. We're noticing that there's some considerable moderate risk there across the Kobuk and Noatak valleys and also across the Bering Strait communities. Some of the snowfall production, though, may eat away at that, but the moisture is certainly there. 2,000 to 4,000 foot levels found across the north and the western interior. Once you get south of the Alaska Peninsula, levels climb to about 4,000 to 5,000 feet there for icing potential on Tuesday. Our jet stream map shows a healthy area of low pressure across the western Bering. Strong west and southwesterly winds coming into that at 90 to 95 knots. Another wave south of the Aleutians with wind speeds coming in around 110 knots, and then slamming into the west coast around 150 knots. Brief ridge across some of the eastern parts of Alaska, but a digging trough to surely shake up the lower 48 weather here in the coming days. Low pressure at 9,000 feet seen just south and west of the Bering Strait and also across the western Gulf. Southerly flow for most of the state there between 15 and as strong as 40 knots. Westerlies over the Bering Sea. High pressure over southeast, also at 3,000 feet. South and easterly winds, though, will be building as we go into the next couple days. Southwesterlies at 3,000 feet, as strong as 45 knots coming into Norton Sound there. Most of the interior looking at wind speeds between 15 and 35 knots, 15 to 20 across the North Slope, and around Kodiak Island about 30 to 40 knots with northwesterlies for the chain. Turbulence is going to focus in the west, a broad area of considerable moderate from the west and the west central Brooks Range down through the Seward Peninsula, most of the middle Yukon, the Koyukuk Valley to southwest, below 4,000 feet, some chop across the Beaufort Sea coast, and again, convection will be possible near the Bering Strait.
Some people think that to be a professional pilot, you have to make your living flying. Well, there's another way to define professional. A professional pilot is a pilot who knows and understands the fundamentals of operating his or her aircraft, both in the air and on the ground. And the second mark of a professional is a desire to always be better. Not just to be a good pilot, but to constantly improve our skills and techniques until we are better pilots. And that's what we're about here today. To review the fundamentals that will make us better pilots as we operate on the runways and taxiways of our airports. In many ways, it takes more knowledge and skill than it takes to fly. So, let's review. Always look, listen, and expect the unexpected.
Know where you are and where you are going.
Study the airport diagram before taxiing.
Write down taxi instructions.
Conduct checklists while stopped, not on the move.
Off, off, off.
Be absolutely familiar with airport signs.
Keep a sterile cockpit to reduce distractions while taxiing.
Identify complex intersections and potential runway crossings.
Look both ways before crossing intersecting taxiways or runways.
When communicating with air traffic control, listen before transmitting.
Cessna 3284 Delta, hold short of runway 19 left.
Listen to what air traffic control is saying to other pilots.
15 Niner Echo Charlie 130 cleared to land. Traffic holding in position.
Be sure you understand all air traffic control instructions.
Cessna 594 base turn approved, runway 25 left, clear to land.
Ask for progressive taxi instructions if confused.
Could you give me progressive taxi instructions?
Cessna 3284 Delta, Merrill Ground, runway 26 right, taxi via Gulf, hold short of runway 26 left.
Don't be afraid to ask that an instruction be repeated.
Ground 3284 Delta, say again.
If you don't know, ask. If you're not sure, verify.
Please repeat.
Squawk 7302.
Read back all hold short, position and hold, and runway crossing instructions. A simple Roger won't do. Repeat the entire instruction.
Cessna 30 Papa. Cross runway 19 left, position and hold runway 19 right.
453 Sierra Papa, crossing runway 19 left, and position and hold runway 19 right.
Turn on all of your lights when crossing a runway. Turn on all of your lights except landing lights when taxiing into position and hold. Turn on your landing lights when cleared for takeoff. This is a signal to other pilots, air traffic control, and ground personnel that your aircraft is moving down the runway for takeoff.
When lining up for departure at night, line up 3 feet to one side of the center line to distinguish your aircraft lights from the runway lights.
Avoid distractions. Observe what's going on around you. Always know where you are and where you're going.
If you and I observe these few common sense rules and procedures, it will go a long way toward making the runways and taxiways of our airport safer. For our passengers, our fellow pilots, and ourselves. Heads up, hold short, fly right.
Hello, I'm Bill Davis, Director of the Office of Runway Safety for the FAA. As a fellow aviator, I hope you enjoyed reviewing runway safety from such an exciting perspective. Our thanks to Patty for showing us that attention to safety really does begin well before we climb into our airplanes. Preventing runway collisions is our #1 goal. We can accomplish this goal if we're all committed to improving our skills while operating on runways and taxiways. Thanks again to Patty Wagg's staff. We wish you blue skies and safe landings.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And now on to a look for your sea ice update here. You can see the Beaufort Sea really hasn't changed very much. North of AKwx, we're still looking at some very slim area of marginal ice. But the point of showing you a little bit further south areas now is that up in inlet areas around Kotzebue Sound and protected coastal regions are seeing more ice forming there, but not so much along the Chukchi coast itself where we're going to have a lot of wind. Notice there's some ice right here along the barrier islands, a very discerning eye needed there, and inside of Norton Bay and the upper end of Norton Sound, we're also getting some new higher concentrations of ice, and we're also getting ice forming along the northern parts of the Yukon Delta. That's important, but it's probably not going to stay because winds are coming up as we talked about. You'll see the marine map here in just a minute. Here's a look at southeast. Northerlies are going to be driving in strong on Tuesday, 30 to 35 knots with gusts to 50 knots inside of Stevens Passage. 5 to 7 foot seas expected on the northern half. Considerably more fair weather as you move into the Clarence Strait. 15 knots and 3 foot seas there. Coastal areas along the outer coast anywhere, 10 to 15 knots with 6 to 8 foot seas from the south and east. As we get into Wednesday, you can see the effects of that new storm moving into the Gulf and how limited it is to the mainly outer coast regions. 35 to 40 knots from the south and east, 12 to 14 foot seas, 15 foot seas outside of Prince William Sound. Southeasterlies on the inside, 4 to 5 foot seas, gusts 35 knots, but the winds flip around to the other direction, although we still have an opposing northerly flow around Lynn Canal with a 3 foot sea on Wednesday. Tuesday's weather across south central, not too bad. 10 knots inside of Prince William Sound, 15 to 20 in Cook Inlet with 3 to 5 foot seas on either side of the Barrens. 7 foot seas as you get out to sea outside of Resurrection Bay. Easterlies 20 knots with 5 foot seas there. And also seas and winds coming up for Wednesday as you would expect. Gales in some cases with 13 to 15 foot seas, 35 knots in most regions. Northerlies 20 knots with about a 3 foot sea inside of Prince William Sound, 20 to 30 knots inside of Cook Inlet with 5 to 8 foot seas developing there for your Wednesday. For southwest now, easterlies coming in out of the northern Gulf toward AKwx, Chignik, Sand Point. Looking for northerlies moving off of the Alaska Peninsula with 6 to 7 foot seas there, 9 foot seas east of Kodiak Island, 5 foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait, and southeasterlies inside of Bristol Bay with an opposing westerly flow on the other side of the front. that's working its way toward western Alaska. 11-foot sea behind that. As we get into Wednesday, more of a west and northwesterly flow for more parts of the Alaska Peninsula, 20 to 35 knots in some cases, 8 to 13-foot seas there. A stronger northeasterly flow wrapped up around the front on the eastern side of Kodiak Island, 15-foot seas, and northerlies going strong in Shelikof Strait with a 9-foot sea for Wednesday. Be careful out there. Wednesday, or Tuesday I should say, for the Aleutians, westerlies working through anywhere from 13 to 18, 19-foot seas there north of the Aleutians, with 9 to 11-foot seas across the Pacific side. The bulk of the wind and the high seas will be out here across the Bering. You can see the greens telling us that seas could be reaching upwards of 20 feet in some cases there just south and west of the Pribilofs. Wednesday, we're looking at a west and southwesterly flow. This is building in advance of the next weather system. You can see the front right here. As we get into the central and eastern chain, anywhere from 15 to 20 knots, 5 to 9-foot seas on the Pacific coast, and 10 to as much as 15-foot seas out in the western end of the Aleutians for your Wednesday. For the west coast, remember that west and southwesterly flow is going to be strong. Some of the coastal flood areas that we're watching are around the Yukon Delta, with seas that could be higher than 4 feet above the normal high tide in the region. We're also watching for coastal erosion potential with high surf across the Norton Sound and southern Seward Peninsula coastline. Southerlies will do that. 16 to 20-foot seas there out at sea, 14-foot seas around St. Lawrence Island, 7-foot seas inside of Norton Sound with that southeast flow. And then here comes that westerly wind that we're worried about. 20 knots in most cases there, with 8 to 9-foot seas out at sea. Southeasterlies settling down for St. Paul and St. George with a 10-foot sea. Northwesterlies for the Kuskokwim Delta with a 7-foot sea. We'll be watching the southwestern coast and the Kuskokwim later on in the week. Now, as we look at the Beaufort Sea, over the ice, 20 knots from the east, southerly strong for the Chukchi coast, 30 to 35, 9 to 12-foot seas there on Tuesday. And you can see more of an inland push there, 20 to 30 knots, with 6 to 8-foot seas expected on Wednesday. Southerlies off the shore of Point Barrow, and south and southeasterlies over the Beaufort Sea coast. A lot going on there. Pay attention to the weather. Winter storm warnings are in effect for the northwestern mountains there in the Brooks Range down into the interior of the Seward Peninsula. In some cases 2 to about 5 inches, and as much as 12 to 14 inches in isolated cases. You're going to see more wind northwest of Ambler there. That's going to cut down on your visibility. And we're also watching for some higher surf and potentially some higher seas across the Yukon Delta region. The low will move from southwest to north and east, but we're also watching the storm moving closer to southeastern Alaska as we get to Wednesday. Your winds will be coming up as well. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.